Hello, everybody. The webinar will begin very shortly. We'll just give everyone a few moments to join the call. So good afternoon from London, everybody, but I know we have a very global audience joining us today. So good morning, good afternoon, and maybe even good evening, wherever you are joining us from. And welcome to the webinar today, which is looking at how governments can reimagine humanitarian aid systems to meet global challenges. I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former UK senior civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which is a media house that works with civil servants all around the world. And I'd also like to thank our knowledge partner today, which is Visa. So in terms of today's topic, in the age of uncertainty, the complexity of the challenges that governments face is increasing all the time. And this is particularly true in the field of international development and humanitarian aid, where issues such as forced displacement, protracted conflict, food insecurity, natural disasters, health emergencies, climate change, all of those mean that aid programs need to be more responsive, efficient, and inclusive than ever. So today we're going to be talking to some great experts around how governments and their partners around the world are looking to build accessible and adaptable aid disbursement programs. So drawing on, in particular, new technologies in this increasingly digital age. And we're going to cover things like ensuring that those solutions meet the specific needs of the people and the communities on the ground, more effective international aid approaches that can accelerate aid delivery, for example, during crisis periods, and how governments can really build those partnerships across the public and the private sector to develop and implement next generation aid programs, including, as I said, making use of some of those digital solutions. We have four fantastic speakers with us here today. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce our four speakers and I'm going to invite them to give some short opening remarks to set the scene for the webinar. But once they have spoken, we're going to give as much time as possible to you, our audience, to put your comments and your questions to our speakers. So whichever device you are using, you should see on the bottom of your screen somewhere, there will be a Q&A button. Please use that Q&A button at any time from now on to message in your questions, and we'll get through as many of those as we can before the end of the webinar. So let me introduce our great speakers. First, we will hear from Marsha Wong, who is Deputy Assistant to the Administrator at the USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, which is the United States government's lead for international disaster response. Prior to joining the BHA, Marsha was head of policy for the International Committee of the Red Cross Regional Delegation for US and Canada, where she led efforts to advance humanitarian policies for people affected by conflict. She's got over 25 years of experience in overseas aid, crisis response, energy and security policies, and has traveled extensively working on issues relating to, amongst other things, Iraq and Afghanistan, the former Soviet Union, Middle East and Africa. I could have gone on for a long time giving the history there. But it's great to have you with us, Marsha. Thank you so much. Then we will hear from Alan Robbins, who is co-founder and executive vice president at DevEx, where he has played a key role in DevEx's journey from a small startup to a leading media platform covering global development, health and humanitarian issues. And through events, visual stories, special reports, and more, Alan's work helps to build partnerships between aid agencies, major corporations, leading NGOs, and other organizations in order to drive the development agenda and create awareness on key global issues. Then we will hear from Louise Holden, who is Global Head of Government Partnerships for our knowledge partner Visa. As a digital payment specialist, Louise and her team build partnerships with organizations including financial institutions, multilateral organizations, NGOs, and fintech govtech organizations, with a current focus on Visa's humanitarian and development practice. Louise has got over 30 years experience of working in large multinational organizations, including roles at Barclaycard, American Express, and MasterCard. And Louise has worked across Europe, Africa, and Australia, and is a Life Fellow at the RSA and on the leadership circle of Arise and Action Aid. And then last but by no means least, we will hear from Farid Belhaj, who is former Vice President for Middle East and North Africa at the World Bank, but he's speaking to us here today in his personal capacity. And during his time at the World Bank, Farid was also in charge of work programs in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, many others. He led the bank's engagement on the Syrian refugee crisis and its impact on the region. And he also served as the World Bank Director for the Pacific Department, where he developed a regional strategy that scaled up bank engagement in small and fragile states. And before that was the bank's special representative to the United Nations, where he engaged with various UN agencies on a range of programs, including climate change and the Millennium Development Goals. So brilliant to have the four of you here with us today. I'm sure you, the audience, will agree. We really do have a stellar panel. So as I said, make sure you take this opportunity and send in all of your questions and your comments using that Q&A function. But without further ado, Marsha, I'm going to come over to you and ask us to give some opening comments.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I want to thank the Global Government Forum and our Knowledge Partner Visa, but also to thank everybody who's joining us from around the world, because I want to thank you for your service also. As Siobhan mentioned, this is a very critical and timely discussion, as the statistics and the trend lines demand our attention and accelerated action. If I may give you some backdrop, this year, the UN estimates that over 310 million people will need humanitarian assistance and protection. The current analysis projects that by 2030, an additional 140 million people will be in need of humanitarian aid. And if we were to focus specifically on food assistance alone, this year, 2024, 152 million people in the most vulnerable countries are in need, 152 million people hungry. These numbers can feel so abstract and so big. So let's just imagine all of the United Kingdom and Germany, every single person in those countries hungry and in need of some sort of food aid. According to the World Bank, we do like to cite the World Bank, if severe food insecurity in fragile and conflict-affected settings continues on its current trajectory, we could face almost 956 million people by 2028 in this crisis category. 956 million. So imagine 3 times every single person in the United States severely malnourished. So why do we have this sobering trend line? Some factors, and adding to Siobhan's description in her introduction, conflict. It is the biggest driver of humanitarian need and hunger, with 70% of the world in areas affected by war and violence. Conflict, like Russia's war against Ukraine, drove up global fuel and food prices and stretched governments' budgets. Conflicts like Sudan result in massive refugee flows, straining host countries. And conflicts last longer. They lead to economic disruption, forced displacement, deterioration in infrastructure and services, and that requires lengthy and expensive humanitarian response at the top. Climate shock. The natural disasters are more frequent and severe, with more countries dealing with instability, also experiencing the compounding stress of climate change. According to the ICRC, 14 of the 25 countries most vulnerable to climate change were also in conflict. Economic instability. The poorest countries are still feeling the COVID pandemic economic effects. They took on more debt to meet their citizens' need for health, education, and welfare, and are struggling to repay that. So the needs continue to escalate, and humanitarian funding is not keeping pace. The gap is extreme. The 2023 appeal from the UN for a record $51.5 billion received only $22.3 billion. Halfway through this year, only 19% of the projected global funding needs of $48.7 billion have been received so far. So against this extremely challenging backdrop, the US is working hard to strengthen our efforts to respond to people in need. We simply have no other choice. This year, the US government's humanitarian budget was bolstered by the passage of the National Security Bill. And we want to thank the US taxpayers for this additional $9.15 billion. But But no complacency here. Given the vast needs, USAID will continue to prioritize for the most acute emergency needs and advocate for more resources. We will urge donors, international financial institutions, and the private sector to step in. But we do need to recognize that just piling in more funding does not necessarily translate into effective response if we do not evolve our approach and bring new solutions to the new nature of humanitarian challenge. And in doing so, we are reflecting on the evolving humanitarian mission and system of UN agencies, INGOs, local responders. Core will always be the ability to deliver short-term life-saving support in emergencies. However, in light of the climate crisis, longer-term resilience work will be critical to help people deal with the effects of extreme weather and to help mitigate risk and impact with early warning systems and anticipatory action. These protracted crises, these long wars, they will demand multi-sectoral approaches and deeper awareness of conflict dynamics. It's important that the humanitarian system, our UN and INGO partners and our local responders, they experience growth in operations over the past decade, but with shrinking resources potentially ahead, they need to be very much a part of reimagining with governments. So we are working with them to focus on core strengths, efficiencies in operations, monitoring and risk mitigation, and to build leadership and staff resilience. And as we reimagine the humanitarian system, here are some critical elements we are keeping in mind. We can't move forward without that effective, robust partnerships, including those with affected populations, and without capacitating the communities which feel that crisis first. And we can't evolve if we're not harnessing innovation and technology. On partnerships, I tell my teams, we should be prospecting all the time. The challenges stretch beyond the capabilities of any one sector, and no one has a monopoly on knowledge or good practice. Thus, that coordinated, joined-up early action is key with the private sector, the multilateral development banks, local organizations, and diasporas. On strengthening local action, it means more than just direct funding to local partners. It means more decision-making power to them. It means more inclusion of those who may be marginalized during times of conflict and disaster. I'm speaking about women and girls, indigenous communities, the disabled, and others. They too must be able to contribute to a reimagined humanitarian system. We're going to be talking a lot about technology today, and it is transformational. Digital technology can aid people in crisis to access services, to connect to networks, and to reliable information. And I do need to stress the word reliable. The humanitarian system needs technology to collect and analyze data, map and forecast, communicate to those in need. It can expand opportunities and bring efficiencies to the system. But it's not simply an app or even an end product. It's a tool that can serve as a foundation and infrastructure to do more. This digital infrastructure delivers greater impact when it reinforces privacy, trust, and equal access. All of these challenges and opportunities, this conversation is helping inform the new USAID 5-year strategic vision for humanitarian assistance. This vision aims to strengthen USAID's leadership and work in effective, accountable, and equitable humanitarian action in an increasingly complex world. We will also be launching soon USAID's policy on locally led humanitarian assistance. So please watch this space. There'll be more information coming your way. Partnerships, local actions, strengthened humanitarian systems, these will be key components of this vision and policy. We are focusing on deepening collaborations with climate, private sector, development actors, and aim to drive locally led humanitarian assistance and integrate and leverage innovation. Even as the system evolves, as we strive to strengthen response, we have to recognize also as humanitarians, we're not working in a vacuum. We cannot expect this crisis to be resolved with solely humanitarian means. Political will and action, development efforts for longer lasting solutions, they must be part of the solution. Hence, governments working on humanitarian crises must be able to work holistically with the larger community, incorporating innovations and practices which can help reverse that upward trajectory of humanitarian needs. Thank you for this time this morning. I'm so looking forward to the rest of the discussion and the comments and questions from our listeners. Thank you.
Brilliant, Marcia. Thank you so much. You really have set the scene fantastically for our conversation. So, I mean, startling those figures that you gave at the beginning in terms of the number of people that already need humanitarian aid and just the trajectory on which that is going if nothing is done about that at the moment. Setting out as well some of the factors behind that conflict, climate shocks, economic instability being some of the key ones there. Funding not keeping pace. And although, as you said, everybody needs to step up and we do want more funding, that can't be the only thing. So having to reimagine and evolve the approach as well, a big part of this, both for short-term responses, but also building that long-term resilience. And as you say, some of those things, the robust partnerships that need to be built, the early action with stakeholders, giving more power to local communities, but also the role of technology and embracing innovation at the heart of all of this going to be really important. And data are part of that, data being used to drive insights that can improve efficiency and impact. And we will certainly be looking out for the USAID 5-year vision for humanitarian assistance and the work coming out of that. And I'm sure we can share that with everybody that's registered here over the coming weeks ahead. Thank you so much, Marcia. Great place to start our conversation. Alan, I'm coming over to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Siobhan, and thanks so much, Marcia. That was such a good overview of everything we're going to be talking about today. And also, the U.S. government is just such an important player in this humanitarian space. It's the biggest sort of provider of humanitarian aid. But yeah, I could have 1,000 questions for Marcia. I'm often the moderator attempts at events like this, so I'm tempted to ask them, but I'm going to keep things moving.
You can come in a moment, Alan. You can come in when we get to the conversation.
Okay. I'm coming at this all from a slightly different angle. So DevEx, if you know DevEx, or if you don't know DevEx, we don't deliver aid or humanitarian aid or assistance, but we're a media platform for those that are. So our audience is more than 1 million professionals working on the SDGs. Some of the things that Marcia talked about are just keep really coming up among those people, which is that the world needs more humanitarian aid than ever, but it doesn't seem like governments are ready to expand their spending quite to that degree. Marcia mentioned USAID's or the US government's expanded commitment, which is great, but the needs seem to be really outgrowing the resources available. So we need to innovate. We need to look at new models for doing this. So we came together a few months ago and cooked up an idea with our friends over at Visa around kind of understanding what the people working in this space, all the people working in this space, or as many as possible, what they think can be done, what insights do they have about crowdsource their views about what we can do to improve on humanitarian aid delivery through innovation and other things. So we did a survey of about 1,000 humanitarian professionals. I'm going to go over this in a second here. We have a few slides and I'll look at the key findings. But we did a survey of about 1,000 humanitarian professionals, did in-depth interviews with a few dozen more, and we released a report back in May called, you see it here in front of you, Reimagining Aid in the Digital Age, Building Global Capabilities to Serve Local Needs. And we had we launched it at for those that are familiar, the Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Weeks in Geneva back in May. And I'll go over a few of the findings here. I expect they'll tie in really well. In fact, some of the things that Marcia mentioned about partnerships, local action, innovation, these are all things that really came out of the event. And what I encourage everyone to do is the last slide that we look at is there's going to be a QR code where you can download the report. And I encourage everyone to do that. Obviously, don't read it until the event is over, but I certainly encourage everyone to download that. If we can move to the next slide here. So there's a lot of data. The report has all sorts of data points. I think I can't remember the exact length, but something like 50 pages. So it's an in-depth report, but we did break it down into 5 key findings. Essentially, one of these key findings is choice. Nobody should be going in and saying, hey, we absolutely have the one perfect solution for delivering humanitarian aid. So choice is really key. 94% of our respondents, of these 1,000 people, agreed that the ability to offer multiple options for delivering humanitarian aid to beneficiaries is important. So we need to think first about the needs of the people, not about the tools available. So the second piece, if we can move to the next slide, is inclusivity and accessibility are paramount for successful program outcomes. So basically looking at a lot of what this is around is making sure that marginalized and unreached populations are considered at the outset. Oftentimes, what they're telling us is that these populations, marginalized and difficult to reach, are often the ones most affected by humanitarian disasters. So we really need to start when planning for programs, really need to think about them very much at the outset. So the data point here is 86% of surveyed aid professionals agree that providing aid through digital payment systems empowers beneficiaries and drives digital financial inclusion. So the idea here being that having different tools using technology can really help some of these communities. Next slide, please. The third one here is speed, essentially. Fast, efficient, more effective approaches are needed to accelerate and scale aid delivery in rapidly evolving crises. This is a lot of where technology really comes in. Things like anticipatory approaches, Marcia mentioned it before, and where you can get to things before they actually, or as they happen, rather than after they happen. Because you can use, I'll be the first one. It's 2024, so it has to happen at some point. But I'll be the first one to mention AI. Using AI tools can be really useful in really building some of these systems. So the data point here is 56% say when deciding the method of humanitarian aid distribution, the ability to deliver results efficiently and in a timely manner remains top of mind for more than for 56% of the people. So speed is key. And if we move on to the next slide, the flip side of this part is planning. And in order to make sure that speed can happen, planning needs to happen. So we have here, looking at, and oftentimes digital infrastructure in general, but often it can be digital infrastructure, can be really a blocker to allowing humanitarian aid delivery to happen. So top barriers that our audience identified in our digital infrastructure, financial literacy, and mobile device access. So these are top barriers to the widespread adoption to humanitarian digital payments specifically. And then if we move to the last slide, this is really about partnerships. And Marcia mentioned partnerships as well. And we asked, looking at diverse, coordinated, well-resourced partnerships are key for next generation aid programs. And then we looked at what are the top challenges to collaboration of actors involved in digital payments ecosystems for humanitarian aid. And one of them is coordination around FSPs. Another one is bureaucracy. That's obviously the one that often comes up in many surveys, but it certainly comes up strong here. And then another one is policies and having weak policies around digitization. So diverse partnerships are key, and some of these blockers need to be taken down for them. So I'll mention them again in kind of very, very short clips. Number 1, choice. Number 2, inclusivity and accessibility. Number 3, speed. Number 4, planning. Number 5, partnerships. These are things. This isn't what we said are the top things that need to be addressed. This certainly isn't what Visa said are the top things that need to be addressed. This is what the community said. And I think it's important to listen to the people that are doing this work every day. So, I hope that provides a good overview of some of these very high level findings. I'm sure we'll get into some of the specifics in the conversation. I think we can all say that there's no easy answers. There certainly isn't one answer. And from my perspective, this sector is such a powerful one, trying to do more good for more people all the time. And the tone of the media is often, including DevX sometimes, is often one of despair. But I think that the people working on this, I think they do remain optimistic. And it's amazing. Even just I mentioned the HNPW event in Geneva, and just how excited people were to be addressing these challenges and knowing these challenges there, but not sort of sitting around their heads down, but talking about how they can do this. So I'm proud of the humanitarian community. I think they're doing a great job. They've got a lot of work ahead of them, but looking forward to using this conversation to help them sort of take one step ahead.
Thanks, Alan. And we can also send that QR code out to everybody as well. So
Siobhan,
thanks so
actually,
much.
let me actually highlight this. I should have highlighted this because I forgot to say next slide. Yes, please do look at the screen now, and you take your mobile phone and take a picture of this and use that to download the report. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Alan. That's fantastic. Really good, as you say, just to get the feedback from the community itself, from professionals and others who are working in this area. Lots of, I think, things reflecting what Marcia said as well about the importance, as you said, of partnerships, of really creating solutions that meet the local needs. So providing choice, not a one solution fits all. So making sure there's choice in terms of solution, embracing innovation. I like the way you said that actually innovation can bridge the gap maybe between the needs and the resources. I think innovation can help. Part of that is embracing technology and new types of kind of digital solutions. Again, you mentioned inclusivity. Interesting that you said digital can drive financial inclusion. I wonder as well if there's a risk which comes up in some of the other events that digital could also create new groups who are excluded. So I think that has to be something that's considered as well. And then also both of you have mentioned that not just the need for the quick responses, although that's very important, but also building that long-term sustainable capacity as well. So lots there already, food for thought. Thank you so much to the audience. Please do get your questions coming in. And Alucine, I think from Sierra Leone, a big hello to you. Was just wondering if Sierra Leone was captured in the USAID report. We'll get back to you on that, Alucine. I'm not sure about that one. So thank you so much to Marcia and to Alan so far. And then Louise, coming over to you now.
Thank you, Siobhan. And the one thing I love about joining webinars like this is how much I learn. So it's so wonderful to share a virtual stage with Siobhan, Marcia, Alan, and Ferid. And it was great also being reminded of the key themes that came out of the DevEx report. And as you said, Alan, it's the voice of the sector, wasn't it? It was a cross-representation of the sector. So, including last mile partners, implementing partners, donors, fintechs, a vast array of individuals were able to contribute. And the fact that it distilled into those 5 themes, which Marcia talked about, I'm going to talk about, really interesting. So anyway, thank you. I'm thrilled, as you can probably tell, about the opportunity to continue to collaborate and share our diverse insights on rethinking and redesigning humanitarian aid. Because as you know, looking at reimagining processes, including the fundamental importance of the humanitarian aid process, it's a group effort. It requires collaboration, it requires partnership, it requires diverse thoughts kind of around the virtual table. So really delighted to kind of be part of that. I mean, at Visa, partnerships is more than just a concept. It's the essence of who we are. While many organizations and individuals recognize us as the company behind credit cards, we're actually kind of more like the UK network rail. We ensure the safe and efficient kind of operation of the payment tracks. We support the signaling, we support the rules, and we provide a variety of pathways for organizations to choose, their financial destinations. So we're the tracks. We're a global payments technology company, and our mission is to create a payments infrastructure that's got to be fast. Alan talked about it in the report, efficient, transparent, but fundamentally secure for receivers and senders. The network's vast. It includes banks, fintechs, mobile operators, and retailers. But we also work hand in hand with governments and with donors and with humanitarian organizations to really try and deeply understand their financial needs and how they need to move money, especially in the times of crisis. We view our position as very much to serve the sector. And to better serve the sector, we need to more deeply understand the sector. We can help by building those strong, resilient, you talked about before, systems, not only to support the immediate need for transfer of aid, but also to support longer-term recovery programs and support resilience programs, and to support anticipatory response as well. And as Alan kind of picked out in the report, our goal as an organisation is to make sure that we can work with our partners to deliver choice, flexibility, and the efficiency. So this involved for us in creating sector-wide solutions that streamline processes, whilst also making sure that we involve the local experts, the local organisations, to make sure that we are locally relevant and we can create impact. As an additional kind of priority, we're also really focused on promoting digital and financial inclusion, economic inclusion. And for us, that means making sure that we offer a variety of solutions through our networks. And some of those solutions might include cash, because cash will always have a role, but a variety of solutions to support transfer of aid, to make sure that nobody is excluded. Everybody can be included, and whatever the solution is right for them, through our partner network and off our infrastructure, we should be able to make that available in and within the local context. So it's all down to partnerships. All the overarching theme that we have is all down to partnerships. So I thought it could be interesting if I gave a couple of examples about how this is kind of coming to life. And the first example I'll give is the work that we're doing in Colombia. In Colombia, we've partnered with a local financial technology company and two non-governmental humanitarian organizations. The partnership is to develop a payment system tailored for the large number of Venezuelan refugees who are making their way into Colombia. The approach involved a lengthy deep dive into the operational challenges faced by both the agencies and by the refugees themselves, trying to really understand the challenges they were facing. What we discovered was that each of the agencies were independently creating and purchasing their own solutions, leading to them carrying all the capex and operational costs of those solutions, unnecessary costs for themselves and for the funding bodies who are downstreaming funds to them and through them. So, for instance, a Venezuelan refugee might receive a debit card from one agency. But then moving to another area, they'd have to go through the same onboarding process with another agency. They'd end up with multiple payment options that weren't interoperable. They didn't support financial inclusion, and they weren't able to be used if they decided to carry on their journey and leave Colombia and move into another country, so not cross-border. So to address this, we created a unified solution. The first agency to interact with the refugee can now onboard them and create a payment tool that's linked to a unique tokenized identifier to that individual. This identifier is securely stored in a cloud server that meets visa security standards. If the refugee moves on to a second agency, they can provide their unique identifier, allowing the agency to validate and duplicate or deduplicate their information. The agency that can use the shared service to make the payments to the existing payment tool, so they don't need to go and procure a second one. So each agency can also maintain control over their specific funds. So shared solutions, sector level, reduces the operational and capital expenditure for the agencies, but also attacks the risk of identity fraud and beneficiary duplication. It also offers the refugee a financial tool that supports cross-border use and supports their financial inclusion. The success of all of this depended on strong partnerships, strong collaboration. It included the really important insights from the local financial provider who understood the nuances of the Colombian context. So our goal was to balance the benefits of central aggregation with the need for local delivery. We're trying to create sector-wide solutions that work across different agencies so that multiple agencies can access them and make use of them. Moving money more efficiently, whilst also making sure that we collaborate with local specialists to ensure that they have the choice and the impact at the last mile. I was asked to consider kind of the role of governments in this. And our kind of encouragement, and we can talk about this in the Q&A, our encouragement is that governments do have a role to support these efforts, both aggregation efforts, but also making sure that we're working with the right local partners. That support could take place in terms of funding, but also endorsing sector solutions and aggregation services. The backing not only promotes the efficiency in contracting and resourcing, but also is really important in empowering those local organizations so that they can have a meaningful impact in the communities in which they're working, and have access to those shared services. So I do have another example, but we can save it, put it in my back pocket for maybe in the Q&A. But fundamentally, the overarching theme, partnerships.
Yeah.
By deeper collaboration, earlier collaboration, we can listen better, create smarter, and make sure that we can have more diverse kind of solutioning available for the practice.
Brilliant. Thanks, Louise. Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be a chance to bring in your other example as well. But it's great to have that example from Colombia, as you say, really showing the importance of listening to what is needed on the ground. In that case, what the refugees actually needed on the ground, what was going to work, and then putting in those solutions that were a unified solution, cross-border. So many things could be done there when you stand back and take a different approach. But also, I love the way that you describe kind of, because I think some people on the audience won't have realised Visa's role in this kind of space. And I've never heard it described as network rail before. That's a very, if you're not in the UK, you might not get that so much, but it is kind of the rails on which all of the trains run, the track, the system underneath it all. But also echoing kind of what Alan and Marsha have said about systems that have to be secure, both for the funders and the receivers, systems that can support quick solutions, but also help with that long-term resilience building as well. And then the importance of partnerships. I think so far that's the big thing that's coming out of this, really that importance of those partnerships. Thank you so much, and thanks. I see we've got questions coming in, which is fantastic. Please do keep those coming in. And Fareed, we are coming over to you now.
Thank you very much to you and to all the colleagues. And this is really a fascinating discussion. Let me be a bit disruptive, just to add some salt to a very, very complex situation. I would say that I'd like to go upstream very much. And, the Dutch philosopher Erasmus was saying that prevention is much better than cure. And it is true that if governments can do anything, it is really to work very hard at preventing those situations that put us against these challenges. We have man-made disasters. Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, Yemen, and we can go on and on. For that, there is a need for use of political clout to set up early warning systems. And that's very important. When we came out a few years back with the conflict and fragility strategy at the World Bank, prevention was really a very important chapter in this whole thing. And of course, we have natural disasters. And even from that, I would argue that prevention is important. And this is the whole conversation that we're having when it comes to climate change, whether it is mitigation or adaptation. So this is something that I wanted to put on the table to start with. And I'm happy to engage in a discussion on that. Second issue I'd like to put on the table is the fact that, there is a very important need to put emphasis on the continuum between humanitarian and development. It is very important to stress the sustainability dimension, the building of resilience dimension of all of our engagement when it comes to humanitarian aid, whether it is regarding refugees, internally displaced people, and any other type of stress that people can be exposed to. I heard what the colleagues mentioned, and I fully agree with the way they are approaching it. The emphasis on local partnerships is absolutely fundamental. Of course, we need to make sure that local organizations and communities ensure that aid is culturally appropriate. I would stress that, culturally appropriate. We had a conversation a few months back when it came to what's happening in Gaza. And, around the bank and others, there were some, kind of willingness to come and help. But frankly, the way that help was, designed originally was going to be hurting, some of the people who we were supposed to be helping. So it's important to put that very, very much up front. Second issue, and I heard it from the colleagues, and I fully agree, to leverage technology. And it's very important. We did it in a number of countries. We did it in Sudan. We did it in Yemen. We did it in Lebanon when we had to engage with the Syrian refugee crisis that really shook Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and countries around that particular region. So looking at technologies such as blockchain for transparent fund distribution, drones for delivering aid to reach areas that are very difficult to reach, and big data for predictive analytics to anticipate and respond to crisis more efficiently. Again, anticipation and prevention, really fundamental if we are looking seriously at making sure that these phenomena either are limited, circumscribed, or kind of prevented in an efficient way. I mentioned the focus on sustainability, and this is, again, we need to shift from short-term relief to long-term development projects to build infrastructure, create jobs, and improve education and healthcare systems. And this is what we have done at the bank. Again, going back to the Syrian refugee crisis in Lebanon and Jordan, but in many other places, in Indonesia, when the earthquake hit part of the country, we worked on making sure that nexus between development and humanitarian aid is very much part of the deal. We also need to look at new financing mechanisms, like catastrophe bonds. This is something that we have shepherded at the World Bank, and this is something that's important. Social impact bonds, public-private partnerships to ensure sustainable and flexible funding for humanitarian efforts. Whatever money governments have, whatever money international financial institutions like the World Bank have, will be a drop in the ocean of needs. There is a very, very important need for the private sector to be part and parcel in this conversation. There is also a need for policy and legal frameworks to strengthen the policies and legal frameworks to protect rights of displaced persons. We have a number of those, instruments around the international community. One can cite, what the US has put on the table, what Canada, the Organization of African Union, in Latin America, the Cartagena Declaration. A number of those are important to build on, because at the end of the day, one would need that kind of structure, that type of a framework that would allow for aid to engage, but also very much, again, going back to my point about prevention, for prevention to be more efficient. Last but not least, monitoring and evaluation. If we want to make sure that governments, international financial institutions, but also the private sector is involved in this, there is a need to make sure that people know and understand the impact of what they are doing, and see that they are making a difference. They see that we are moving the needle from one place to the other in a clear and monitorable way. And that's really something that I believe we need to be looking at. I'm happy to engage afterwards when it comes to specific examples, but for me, this is broadly the conversation. Prevention, very, very much at the center of it. If we cannot prevent, well, at least we need to make sure that whatever we do is sustainable and whatever we do is monitorable. Thank you.
Fareed, thank you so much. As you say, I think picking up on kind of some of the issues that have been mentioned before in terms of that need to move from immediate and quick aid to sustainable building resilience development kind of programs, really, really key, as you say, the focus on building infrastructure and creating jobs. And maybe interestingly, some maybe of the solutions, the digital solutions, as Louise said, help that maybe by improving financial inclusion as well. So maybe there's some links there to be made. the importance of kind of early warnings, whether it's man-made from conflicts, or using political kind of information, political clout to give those early warnings, but also can you use data, for example, maybe to give predict kind of natural disasters as well, and start getting smarter on the insights there. You brought in some other areas I think that hadn't been mentioned before, so different types of technology. You mentioned drones, blockchain technology to make things secure, big data, for example, new financing mechanisms, so different types of bonds available, and private public partnerships, echoing that sense that the public sector can't do this on its own. It has to be everybody involved in this. And then also two key things at the end, looking at policy and legal frameworks and how they might need to be strengthened. And then really, really important, again, which I think maybe technology and digitalization can help with as well, which is how do you make sure you evaluate the aid programs and make sure that they are effective and they are targeting where they should be targeting and having the right impact, to make sure you can keep funders involved as well, and confident that their money is going to the right place. Thank you so much to all of you. Fantastic presentations there. And we have already got a couple of questions coming in to the audience. Please do send in any other questions that you have. But I just want to quickly, before I go to the questions from the audience, I had a couple of questions myself. And I think one is a very general question, I think, which is, you've kind of touched on it in your presentation, but just to set the scene slightly before we go to the more detailed questions, how have these challenges changed, would you say, in the last decade? So what are the new big challenges facing governments and the stakeholders in this area now that maybe they didn't have 10 years ago? And Marsha, I want to come to you first because we haven't heard from you for a while.
But I will talk for the next 45 minutes, Siobhan. So no,
I'll turn you on mute, Marsha. Don't worry, I have the power.
Yes, you do. No, thank you for everyone's very, very provocative presentations. I've taken pages of notes here. What is different now? And again, we have been stressing technology, and I think that has been both an ad, but it also can be, the unintended consequences of using technology. And I know everybody here knows what I'm referring to. And I really appreciate how Visa has been a real trailblazer in terms of data protection, privacy rights. But as we work in some of these very complex contexts where regrettably some of the authorities in place may in fact be parties to a conflict or be part of the disruptor, those relationships and engagements have to be very, very nuanced. And then the use of technology when we're protecting data and a government says, but I need to know your beneficiary list. Let me see who you're providing cash support to. So these are just, as we step into these spaces of bringing faster, more responsive tools, what are the downsides to it? So stress testing, these scenarios before we think of applying them. The other thing, if I can say, and I know 10 years ago we were talking climate, but I feel today we are talking climate, capital C, bold font. And just seeing how, again, looking at ourselves as humanitarian responders. Let me just give you an awful statistic about food aid, which is the biggest portion of our assistance with our partners. It also is the biggest expender of carbon emissions, just the way we've been doing it in the past. Big airlift, big warehousing. So it does mean more emphasis on the local procurement where we can. It means more greening of the supply chain and logistics. So the internal look at how we have to be responsible with our partners and how we contribute to climate disruption, that is something 10 years ago I don't think we had quite as much emphasis on. So those are two things that we're very, very focused on and working with the community to try.
Thanks, Marsha. I'm going to come to all of you on this question of what's changed. And Alan, I'm going to come to you. I will mix the order up after this, but Alan, I'm going to come to you and I want to bring in at the same time. So Alicine, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but has asked for, so Alicine has said, I would like USAID, but I'm going to broaden that out a little bit, just to focus on climate change issues here in Sierra Leone. So it's your point, Marsha, climate being a key factor here because of the high rate of deforestation as a result of community livelihood that has a direct impact on so many areas. So Alan, was this something that came out in your research, kind of that climate issues are now something that are kind of front and center in this area?
Yeah, so we didn't focus specifically on climate, but it certainly came out. I mean, the climate emergency, or whatever one wants to call it, is facing everyone in the world today. I mean, even in places that 10 years ago weren't being affected, they are now. So I think it comes out in every conversation around this. I think that in terms of what's changed, how things have changed, I agree, or why we might have a room to be more optimistic. I mean, the challenges are strong, bigger than ever, but so are the sort of the possible solutions. And I think technology, I agree with Marcia on technology, is a big one. The other one is the different players that are in the space, the different actors, and even groups like, I talked to a complete layperson about these topics and mentioned like the role that insurance can play, and sort of insurance mechanisms. Like, it can play a huge role, especially when you talk about climate, right? If you can get good insurance mechanisms, you can help deliver aid quickly, and you can help mitigate some of the challenges people face from some of these disasters. So I think that technology, and then also when I'll tell a story here. When we started DevX, back about 25 years ago, I look back and I think about sort of who this space was at the time, and it was very much, USAID and Save the Children, and very much the traditional players who are still play a huge role. Obviously, they're all still hugely important, but the ecosystem is so much bigger now. You've got all these high net worth individuals, these foundations, these companies that want to somehow become engaged. Just that ecosystem is getting much bigger. So I think that's a reason for some optimism for where we can go. So I know
bigger challenges maybe, but equally more people trying to help. So yeah, interesting.
Right, exactly.
Louise, and then Fareed, just to finish off on this, what's changed? What are the challenges now?
Yeah, so I really agree with both what Marsha said and with Alan as well. And I'm going to talk about kind of partnerships, but also organisations who are involved in the sector and have more of a kind of opportunity and are kind of collaborating with some of the more traditional organisations. Both we see regularly. ATech, FinTech, health tech organizations who are coming out leveraging really cool kind of innovation and technology to be able to address specific challenges. Then they have the questions about, well, how do they kind of build their own resilience and their own kind of economic sustainability? How do they help scale? But I think that the rate of innovation and entrepreneurial drive within the humanitarian sector, supported and advocated by organizations like USAID, like WFP, who invest in these startups in this sector, I think it's really exciting. Innovation for me, I'm sure it always comes from the outside in. So we have to, the more that we can reach out and we can support and we can work with AI and generative tools, but also with our own networks to be able to understand what is out there, I think is really important. But for me, one of the biggest changes kind of over the last, it's going to be kind of 5-6 years, we've talked about climate being a big environmental impact, but let's mention the pandemic and let's mention the conflicts around the world. So certainly what we saw, with the pandemic, and we're still paying the bill for the pandemic, and that is fundamentally being one of the influencers, as has the implications of many of the conflicts around the world running currently, the implications on the funding gap. And what I'm going to talk about there is just a kind of couple of data points in that, we talk about the funding gap and we look at the need and we look at the overall value of kind of overseas development assistance. But in some countries, 50% of that ODA now is supporting domestic refugee priority kind of programs. There's maybe less available for international kind of overseas assistance. Domestic programs and domestic kind of policies have kind of repivoted, repivoted that. So that's something to think about. And that's where, technology and partnerships and thinking more creatively have to come into play, because of, as Marsha said at the beginning, the need is greater than ever before.
Yeah.
So how do you work together? So yeah, let's not forget the pandemic, even though it feels quite some time ago. Another impact of the pandemic, was the acceleration of digital.
Yeah.
And certainly kind of digital payments. And the it wasn't just in a response and then dropped off. The sustainable use of wallets, of kind of contactless technology, and kind of e-commerce as well. It's changed the nature about how we pay, and the organization kind of involved in. So again, that's another kind of foundational and kind of international impact and in kind of environmental driver that I think is influencing the way we as organizations, our partner organizations, can solve for some of these challenges.
Thanks, Louise. Fareed, I'm coming to your final thoughts on this kind of what's changed. And I just wondered, picking up on what Louise said in particular there, I mean, humanitarian aid has always been a bit of a political football, hasn't it? It's always been used, changes of administration. But do you think with all these other pressures on public sector budgets at the moment, that there is a tendency, I think, for people to suck that money back to domestic programs?
Yeah, no, that's going to be a tension. Always, in particular when you have elections coming or looming, and if you look around the world right now, you have 2/3 of the countries around the world are going through elections, and notably those big donors. So we are looking at a very difficult time, notably at a moment where we are trying to get we have this fund for the poor, the International Development Association, IDA. Replenishment, and this is a time when we are trying to gather as much as possible, and unfortunately things are not going in the right direction. But let me make 2 points here. One, in terms of the opportunity or in innovation when it comes to the new challenges, we have put together a few years back something that we call the Disaster Risk Financing and Insurance Program, and this is going to what Mark was mentioning earlier. It helps the countries ensure that their populations and are financially protected in the event of a natural disaster. And this is a very, very important program, and I think it's important for all of us to take a look at it, and possibly to have the private sector, show more interest in these kind of programs. The second issue I'd like to put on the table, again mentioning the man-made, part of this, unfortunately. Now we are not just dealing with state actors. We are also dealing with non-state actors. We are dealing with gangs and bands and militias around the world. Look at what's happening in the Sahel in Africa with Wagner, and one can go on and on this. So it's important that we also keep in mind that unfortunately this type of new phenomena will continue to expand, and hence again the fact for the states, for the governments, to keep a very, very, very sharp eye on the development of those, and surely not to use them as their own proxies, as we see it happening in many places around the world.
Thanks, Fareed. I mean, so many questions coming in we're getting now. I'm going to go now to the questions, and jump in. I'm going to put them to you, but if you want to just move on, then let me know so we don't keep duplicating. But I really like this question. It's come from Abu Bakar, who has said, how do we ensure the effectiveness of cash support in a politically corrupt economy? I think this goes back to what you were saying, Fareed, about evaluating aid. Part of evaluating aid is it getting to the people that it needs to get to? So many attempts fail to reach most of the beneficiaries. So not just cash support, but I guess any support, how do we make sure it's reaching the people it needs to reach, in particular in a context of corruption? Fareed, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to mix up the order. I'm going to start with you first on that one.
The issue of corruption is, this is a plague, unfortunately. We see it all over the world, and look, one needs to do one's best on that. What we do, again, talking about personal experience, we need to make sure that there is enough of a tracking system so that whatever we put on the table goes indeed to the beneficiaries. And this is where the use of new technology is very important. I was mentioning earlier the fact that having a transparent way of channeling funds, and this is what Visa is doing, for instance, and we have used Visa and MasterCard in a number of places where refugees needed to get their financial assistance directly, hand to hand, without going through governments. And I think this is important, because when you get into a place where there is a conflict, where there are tensions, well, the governments are not always the best vehicle to get money through. So we try to do that through new technologies, etc. But whatever we do, we will always need to have some kind of a nod from the government. You cannot just take it upon yourself to go into a country and start opening your own little factory of aid. It doesn't work that way. If you want to do it that way, then you will face a lot of pushback from the authorities on the ground. Need to compromise, need to find ways and common ground, and frankly, need to make sure that you monitor whatever you do, so that the governments themselves see that you are doing so. I'll give you one example. When we engaged in helping the Lebanese government getting vaccines, going to the issue of the pandemic, well, you know what? When the vaccines arrived, and in spite of the fact that we had very clear protocols as to who should get those vaccines first, etc., well, we found out that there were a number of government officials who were running around and being vaccinated first. We stopped it, and we made such a big deal out of it on the news, networks, etc., that phenomenon stopped immediately. Yeah. So it's very important to be out there and to denounce when we feel that there is something that is not going right.
So it comes back to your monitoring, keeping an eye on what's happening, monitoring.
Always.
Yeah.
Always.
Marsha, you were nodding along to a lot of what Fareed was saying. Your thoughts on corruption and...
Well, my face is the big tell. This is certainly something that everybody has to be acutely aware of. And as Fareed described it, you're in that delicate space. Every one of us are in a delicate space of working within these countries and with the authorities, whether they're viewed as de facto or legitimately in place. I think it's important, at least from BHA's point of view, is that we don't provide government to government humanitarian aid the way that the World Bank will work through, Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Planning. That said, we do have to make sure that the response is always going to be principled, working through UN agencies and down to their colleagues on the ground. The technology does play a role in that, of course, and what we would describe helping track the post-distribution of cash or of goods. And it really requires our partners to be extremely diligent and not underinvest. And once it goes out the door, the aid from the warehouse to the truck to the community, that somebody comes back afterwards to talk to the community. Yeah. Maybe, in some places, safety and security won't allow that. Again, technology, or there's safe ways to report and to survey. So these tools are being, demonstrated and applied in places, to be honest, where BHA as U.S. government, we can't even be in. So Afghanistan, Burma. Right. So we really need to rely on these tools. But as Fareed described it, it is a very delicate move around governments that may be corrupt or other actors in the economy being corrupt. And I think also in the principled humanitarian stance, if and when we are faced with that and there's risk of diversion, we insist that our partners stop the action, report to us immediately, when we problem solve, we problem share together. And that's a little bit where diplomacy and political leverage can come into the picture then.
Thanks. As I say, we've got loads of other questions to get through, but Louise and Alan, did you want to add anything on the corruption point? Louise?
Well, I just have a little story to tell. I'm going to try and match one here, but and I remember working on a digital payroll program within Egypt, and it was for Egyptian police officers. It was a long time program supported by the kind of interior minister, and the kind of the goals were trying to make sure that the payroll could be delivered kind of quickly and efficiently to the the police officers. But the interesting feedback that was first had was that the program was a success, but the police officers kind of fed back. They were slightly concerned because they thought they'd all got a pay rise. And actually what was happening was that they were getting the full 100% of their payroll every month now, because of the digital kind of transfer and the digital technology and the fact that it was now traceable. So, I mean, you wouldn't be surprised to hear me say that I also recognize that digital has a role and a capability to deliver transparency, accountability, and some credible empirical data, kind of both from the program but at the back end, about how the effect and the impact of those payments. However, digital programs and kind of platforms are better when worked kind of aligned and alongside government. So it's a tricky one. But I do know that the solution has advantages, but it's the mechanism and the partnership that you need to be able to do that effectively, build trust, and enable it to be as effective as it can be.
Thanks. And Monica has come in and said in India they've used direct benefit transfers to transfer cash to beneficiaries' accounts to curb corruption. So yeah. Alan, I'm going to move on to the next question, if that's right, because there's at least two more that I want to get in, and we're running out of time here. But there's a great question come in from Alicia Dent, who has said, in the last decade or so, which humanitarian response do you think has had the greatest success, and vice versa, and why? What were the factors, best practice, lessons learned, etc.? So any examples of good practice? I love that. I think that's nice. We're going to have to be quick, though, so there's another question I want to get in as well. So Alan, any great examples?
I saw this question. I was scared I might have to answer it. So it's a hard one, right? Because I don't think that too many people working on these projects, when they're making sure that people are not dying, right? But they're still, like if you're delivering food aid, those people are still living a difficult life, right? So it's kind of hard to say like, wow, what a great job we did, So I guess I'll probably take a little bit of a dodge and say Marcia probably has, working at the USAID, you probably have better examples. My dodge will be probably the ones that never happened, right? Like maybe some development policies that allowed for a famine to never happen would be the most successful ones. But in terms of actual, like once they've happened, that's a hard one.
So where prevention actually worked. So you didn't see. Great. Fareed, did you have any examples? And then Marcia, any examples you'd like to give?
Let me blow my own horn on that one and say that what we did in Lebanon and Jordan is nothing short of really exemplary. And I'll give you how it was. Imagine Lebanon, 4 million people. This is the population of Lebanon, 4.2 million. And they are living with about 2 million refugees. So this is when the whole thing started. Imagine the whole population of Mexico double going up to the United States within the span of, 6 months. It is incredible. What we did there are two things. One, we had a two-pronged approach. One is obviously to try to help the government through a number of projects, notably education, making sure that those Syrian kids would have their own shifts in the Lebanese schools, and health. That was very important. At the same time, we tried to prevent the very real possibility of tensions between the Lebanese people and those refugees coming into Lebanon. Imagine Lebanon is a multi-faith, multi-religious country. So when you have Sunni refugees from Syria coming in one shot, you can imagine the tension with the Christians, with the Shia, and with the others. So this is one. Second, and this is really a great call and a shout out, to the international community. USAID was with us on that as well. Was to put together what we called it was kind of a funding mechanism that allowed for Lebanon and Jordan to get almost zero interest loans from the World Bank. Basically, what we did is, look, we are asking Lebanon to host refugees. basically to give and deliver a public good to the world, and we are asking them to pay for it. This is unfair. So what we need to do is, if it's not grant, at least making sure that we are not making the Lebanese and the Jordanians pay high interest for the loans that they were getting. And we put together that mechanism that was so successful that the Obama administration used it to help with the refugees going from Venezuela to Colombia a few years back.
Right.
So,
right.
So this is kind of a scheme that is important and allows, again, countries that are on the verge or on the brink of collapse in a way, to get as concessional aid financing as possible in order to help them keep that kind of a equilibrium within their own population.
Brilliant. Thanks, Fareed. Just to let you know, I mean, we are running out of time, but I am going to come to Marsha and then Louise if you want to have a good example where things have gone well. But just to let you all know, the final question will be the one around emphasizing the need. So this has come from Abibatu, who has said, thank you for emphasizing prevention, all of you. However, I'm wondering how prevention can be successful or effective and drive impactful results, knowing that commitments from funders are only partially received. So essentially, how can you focus on prevention when you don't know whether you're going to have the commitment of funds from people, and is there a catch-22 kind of there? So I like that question as well. So first of all, Marsha and Louise, do you want to come in on have you got a good example? And then you can also touch on the prevention. How do we move to prevention?
Thank you. Just a very quick sort of micro example. And Fareed, thank you for reminding us of the replicability of these financial mechanisms. That concessional financing facility and its use for the Venezuelans was a great jump from the Middle East to Latin America. I'd like just to call your attention to Philippines. It has been a place that has been racked by violence. We've seen, the extremists and the insurgency in Mindanao, political instability over the years, the economic instability that results from it, and they are also in the pathway of typhoons and natural, disaster impacts. Over the course of years of investing with them, and especially after Typhoon Haiyan, the private sector also really stepped in very, very vigorously, and with coaxing and encouragement and shepherding by many donors too. But I think there was a recognition that, again, their communities were being affected, their businesses also. So having a vibrant private sector was really key to that. So that's an example of where we've seen an evolution and an inclusion. But here's the best part about this story. Last summer, August, typhoons were roaring up there. USAID, our colleagues in the Department of Defense, Indo-PACOM, especially, all eyes on this as a strategic partner for us in the region. Ready to provide assistance, needs assessments. We're talking to the disaster management agencies, the civilian authorities there. The answer was, we got it. And our assessments indicated, yeah, they kind of do. Philippines Red Cross, the private sector, the disaster management agency. So for me, it was sort of, we've all done our job. They don't need outside assistance. So I just wanted to provide that as an example.
Thanks, Marsha. Louise.
So just find my mute button. I'm going to take you into a different geography and give you a different example. And I think the one of the best examples I've got is a demonstration of, if you're prepared, how you can increase your reach and your scale. So Ukrainian government about 7-8 years ago started investing heavily in government digital transformation. Part of that is that they made available to Ukrainian citizens a mobile application which enabled them to access multiple government services, but also make and receive payments to government. So when the pandemic occurred, they wanted to incentivize the take-up of vaccines to Ukrainian citizens, and they were able to push an incentive to individuals who demonstrated that they had taken the vaccine. So that's kind of use case number one. But then the invasion happened, and within a very short space of time, millions of Ukrainians had to pack up their belongings and leave the country, because they had already in their hands the DEAR application. The Ukrainian government was able to continue connecting, providing payments, and having kind of access to their citizens, however cross border the journeys that they took across Europe. So I think the message there is it's a different geography for a different reason, but preparedness was able to support kind of increased reach, kind of scalability, speed, and support the kind of some anticipation kind of theme in there as well. So I just thought I'd throw that in as an example.
Thanks, Louise. That's brilliant. I just want to say finally, before we wrap up, and I am going to ask one final question, but Alicine, thank you for all of your comments and questions that you're putting in. We will deal with all of those behind the scenes. Don't worry, we will get back to you. I know there are a lot of specific issues that you're raising about Sierra Leone and refugees, so we will try and come back to you on some of those behind the scenes. We're not ignoring all of those questions. I think the question on prevention, we've got 30 seconds, so somebody, if you might want to take this, please do shout at me, put your hand up. I'm going to rephrase it slightly because I think maybe what they were getting at is it harder to raise funds and get funding for prevention activity than it is for kind of immediate relief, where people, I think, want to help because that's kind of the nature, I think, some people really want to give money in the immediate aftermath of a crisis than it is to raise funds for long-term prevention. Does anybody want to come in on that on the final kind of 30 seconds?
Sure, Siobhan, I can hop in. So I do think it is harder in the U.S. context. Certainly, it's just it's a much easier, it's probably the wrong word, but it's less difficult for USA to find money for humanitarian things. The easiest thing for Congress to understand. I think that I don't want to contradict our old friend Erasmus, but I think sometimes prevention can be the cure. And to Louise's point, I think Louise made the point before about having the digital systems in place, which an investment in digital can be both. It can be both an investment in making sure that entrepreneurs can make more money and making sure that businesses get started. And then also it can be an investment in making sure that recipients of aid can get that without the corruption and without as possibly, obviously there's other things that have to be in place, but possibly without as much corruption. We often think about sort of cash payments as like a truck driving down, a Brinks truck driving down with a whole bucket full of cash. But if we can make that cash come at the latest possible moment, it can help avoid some of these corruption issues. So I think yes, it is harder, and it might be about packaging them as some of these things can be seen as both prevention and cure.
Yeah, thank you so much. But I just want to make sure, does anyone else want to come in before we have to wrap up?
I believe the issue of prevention, and by the way, Mark, I will tell Erasmus that you're not in agreement with him. But on prevention, I think that the main issue we have right now is the issue of climate change. And if there is one funding that really need to come against that, it is on climate change. And we're looking at the Paris Agreement and all of those targets that we have. And if there is anything that this needs to be done yesterday and heavily, it is really on the issue of climate change, both mitigation and adaptation.
Thank you so much. Well, that is sadly the end of our conversation. I can't believe how quickly that conversation has gone, but thank you so much to the audience for sending in so many fantastic questions. Thank you to our amazing panel, to Alan, to Louise, to Marsha, and to Fareed. I mean, there couldn't be a more important conversation. Thanks to all of you for the work that you do, both on the panel and in the audience, because your work is literally saving people's lives. So really, really important conversation. To the audience, we've sent out a short questionnaire. If you don't mind taking a couple of minutes to fill that in, I'd be hugely grateful. It means that here at GGF, we can keep giving you the webinars that are of most importance to you. Thank you to our knowledge partner, Visa today. We will be sending everybody who registered and everybody who watched live today a link to this video so you can watch it all again, share it with your colleagues, and we will be sending out an article with the key points from the discussion, which you can also share with your networks. But from me, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are, and I hope to see you on another one of our webinars very soon. Thanks to our great speakers. Cheers. Bye-bye.